Hello and welcome. I'm Real Crowd CEO Adam Hooper, and this is the Real Estate Investing for Your Future podcast. Here we explore the latest in commercial real estate trends, insights, and investment strategies that passive investors can use to build real estate portfolios that last.
All opinions expressed by Adam, Tyler, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Real Crowd. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. To gain a better understanding of the risks associated with commercial real estate investing, please consult your advisors.
Welcome to the final episode of the special series that we recorded live from ULI's Fall Meeting in Dallas. In today's conversation, we're discussing the 2023 Emerging Trends in Real Estate report put out by ULI and PwC. To help break down the report, we're joined by Anita Kramer of the Urban Land Institute, Andy Cohen of Gensler, and Onay Payne of Lafayette Square. Our first interview is with Anita Kramer, Senior Director at ULI, to offer an overview of the Emerging Trends report. To download the report and to follow along with the conversations, hit that pause button, check the show notes, or Google ULI Emerging Trends. All right, welcome back to the episode. Hopefully you've got that report in front of you. Here's Anita Kramer to break it down. All right, well, Anita, thank you so much for taking some time to share your thoughts about the ULI Emerging Trends report. Before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at the Urban Land Institute?
Sure. I run a program at ULI called RECAP, that's the acronym. It's the Center for Real Estate Economics and Capital Markets. And our products we have two main products and then some smaller ones. The main product, one of our main products is Emerging Trends, which we're here to talk about. And the other one is the ULI Real Estate Economic Forecast, which is actually quite separate and done quite differently. That's a forecast we have an ongoing pool of real estate economists from leading real estate organizations that give us their twice-a-year forecasts on metrics that the industry follows for the next 3 years. And and obviously I will be getting into exactly what the Emerging Trends is and how different it is from that particular product, but I just wanted to mention it. And then we also look at every year we will look at a different new topic on the horizon. So this past year we looked at the issue of conversions from older commercial buildings to multifamily. I stumbled there because a large segment are former office buildings, but it's not all just former office buildings. And also looking at where the retail opportunities are today, because there are, as much as the landscape is changing, there are thriving retail opportunities.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And again, we'll have links in the show notes to those reports. So given this episode is about the Emerging Trends report, would highly recommend if you're going to listen to this throughout, why don't you go ahead and download that report so you can review that as we go through. So Anita, why don't you tell us high level, what is the Emerging Trends report? How long has it been running for? And just some overview of how you approach it.
Sure. So one of my favorite topics. The report itself this is its 44th year, so it's been going on for quite a while. ULI has been involved, I think this is their 21st year. So we've been in almost half of its life. It is a report, and it is done in partnership with PwC. I always want to make sure that I mentioned that we work very closely together. It's a true collaboration. It is a report that looks at the overarching trends that will impact real estate over time and broadly, and even though it might impact different markets somewhat differently and in different time frames, but it is those overarching trends. The other distinguishing feature is that it is a sentiment report in that we are gleaning the knowledge and the insights from almost 2,000 senior real estate professionals across the country. And we do that in 3 ways. One way is, and a very key way, are one-on-one interviews. And we do, and when I say we, it is a team effort with PwC. We did about 300 of those interviews. They are usually somewhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And we have a series of questions that we are really asking them to think about every aspect of the industry. So that's one way that we're really listening to what they're saying and what they're thinking. It is a real listening exercise. People are not sitting there saying, well, this is exactly the next emerging trend. But we just have to hear how they're thinking to really tease out kind of the common threads that we're hearing throughout these interviews. The second one is a very, again, comprehensive and extensive survey, online survey, of course, and that was answered by, I think, almost 1,500 people this year. That just expands the scope, the same profile of people, but expands. It was 1,450 people who responded, and I've been told it's grueling. But despite that, people do answer. It is the longest survey in the industry. As people try to reduce the number of the time people need to take to answer surveys, we have not budged. In fact, I think we've expanded it. We just try to make it user-friendly because it's so informative to us. And the third is something that we developed just maybe 5 or 6 years ago, which is to get more insight into the individual markets across the country. So our interviews tend to be with people who are operating kind of on a national level, not necessarily always active in many markets, but really watching for those opportunities. So to get a very deeper dive into as many individual local markets, we have worked with the ULI district councils. Those are like ULI at the local level, like local chapters. And they work with us to bring together a small group of their senior people to answer a set of questions and discuss a set of questions about their market. And then we have an intake form where they each fill out their thoughts. And that has been just invaluable as well, expanding what we understand is happening across the country. I just wanted to mention kind of the profile of the people that we do contact. So I'm looking at the distribution of the profile of the people that answer the survey, and that is pretty reflective of both the one-on-one interviews and the focus group. So the largest group are private property owners or commercial multifamily real estate developers, and then real estate advisory service firm or asset managers is the next largest, private equity real estate investors, bank or other lenders. So, and then there's, home builders, investment managers, advisors, those are the smaller, but really those that are actively involved in development and investment, advising and lending, I would say, in finance.
Yeah, and I think what's key and what we've always enjoyed about the report is it's not you just making these things up and saying, this is what we think is important, right? It's actually going out, collecting the data from practitioners, listening to them, and then sorting through those responses and kind of teasing out what is important to the people that are actually in the field doing the work, right? And I think that's what's so unique and different about this report is the tangibility of those themes and its immediate applicability to things that are actually mattering to the people that are doing the work, right?
Yeah, yes, and thank you for emphasizing that. That is, I think, what makes it stand out, and what makes it really enjoyable to work on, because we are really trying to understand what people are saying and how they're thinking. And again, it's not that people are coming to us and saying, this is what I think is the emerging trend. Sometimes people do, but generally that's kind of not their day-to-day how they think. But they're mentioning something that they've noticed that is different. So this is how we start developing the direction that the report is going in.
And now, over the next few episodes, we'll be talking to some folks that were on stage at the fall meeting to tell us about the current report, the 2023 report. How have you seen some of these trends change, or we've been through a pretty tumultuous few years here, right? Are there some longer terms since the PERT's been around 45 years, ULI's been involved for 20 plus? Are there some consistent themes throughout, or is it pretty varied from year to year? How do you see that?
Okay, so again, a good question. I would say a couple of things. There have been some noticeable changes in the markets over time. So 10 years ago, it was, the sexy six, right? So it's the old traditional markets that got all the attention. And really that has been a major change as we watched the smaller markets kind of rise into the top 20 and the top 10. And that's when we coined the term 18-hour city. It has to be about 8 years ago now. And then that sea change has just was really clear, and that has then developed legs in different directions. So that was kind of a big shift. And then as we watched, there's kind of different differences within what we once lumped together as 18-hour city. That was just our first going in. So now I think you may notice that we have created categories for every market instead of, it's the top markets and then there's everybody else, or there's top markets and 18-hour cities and everybody else. What we found and understood is that while not every market is the size that can handle institutional investment, there actually is quite a bit of institutional investment, and even in places that once there weren't, as people look for opportunity, but that there's other kinds of opportunity for other kinds of investors and developers in almost every market. And to give them their due, we created, and getting away from, what you almost don't hear anymore, primary, secondary, tertiary, and getting away from, if you're not primary, you're 18-hour city, which we realized after a few years that wasn't even the case. And so we have worked the last 3 years to kind of evolve these different categories and try to provide the industry just kind of a different perspective on how to think about the different markets. So that's been kind of something that's been evolving and has kind of been there every year for some time now. The other thing I wanted to point out is so we try to be true to emerging trends. So that's when I started off by saying these are kind of overarching trends that will play out over time. So that's kind of emerging. But there's some things that I probably could fall into the category of we can't not spotlight. So the affordability issue in housing, it's a crime that it's still there, but we can't just say we mentioned it 1 year and therefore we're not going to mention it again. It needs to be front and center.
Right, it's a persistent trend, not so much an emerging trend. Yeah.
I mean, I hope it doesn't become a secular trend.
Yeah.
And we're not going to go there on that one. So that one, and it does get worse. So we brought that up maybe, everything is 8 years ago. I don't know, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and we just find a different way to emphasize it and a piece of information to educate people and keep that awareness and importance. Certainly, infrastructure has been on our radar for a number of years. That has come up, mostly the lack of funds for that, and then what cities and states have been trying to do on their own, and now, of course, there's good news. And so we've also spotlighted the equity aspect of some of those funds.
Yeah.
So that's are kind of the, and then there's the things that are just new every year, and we don't revisit, like prop tech, although which we had last year, but this year we weave it into other trends. So we're talking about affordability is, where are we on the technology that could possibly help that? So, yeah, I would say that's kind of an overview of how trends evolve and stay with us and pass on.
Yeah, and I'll say before we jump into maybe some of your key thoughts quickly on the 2023 report, I will say I'm not sure who within ULI is responsible for it, but I do have to give a quick shout out for the cheekiness of naming the trends. That's always one of my favorite parts of the annual report.
We have a good time on that one. That is a group effort. That is our fun. That is where we have our fun.
Gotta have a little fun, right?
I did want to also mention, if you don't mind, going back to kind of how the report comes together and who worked on the report. So I talked about kind of where we get kind of our fodder for identifying the trends, but we also include in the report there's a particular chapter called the property type outlook. And we have, for the main property types, we have individual experts who are writing about how they view where that sector is going and the issues in that sector. And that adds as well to what we can pull from in terms of are there some overarching trends that are emerging here? But in and of themselves, they are really valuable pieces of writing and information. And also in that chapter, we have we incorporate the subsectors or the niche sectors by having experts in those. So we do that by sidebars. It's just the convention of kind of how we present. But those are also written by people that are in the industry and are experts on those as well. So I just want to call that out as a valuable piece that for actually reading the report, but also kind of another way to inform us as we develop the trends.
Yeah, and again, links are in the show notes. Highly, highly recommend. If you haven't downloaded and reviewed the report, do so. It's always just jam-packed full of great information, so highly, highly recommend that. And Anita, as we wrap it up here today, why don't you tell us a little bit about what are a few of the key trends that you're paying attention to or seem most interesting to you, given where you're at of kind of overseeing all of them.
Yeah, right. I was going to say it's kind of like asking me like which child do I love the best? Which of my children do I love the best?
Well, you got 10, 12 to choose from here with some trends and some add-ons. So.
Okay. So first of all, I want to kind of mention the theme. I think sometimes kind of if you look at all of them together, the theme is really this year's like taking the long view. So which kind of fits with what the report always tries to do, which is looking at the emerging trends that play out over time. This year, obviously, we're in a high degree of uncertainty. I know that word is used quite a bit in many different times, and I think it definitely applies to where we are now. So I think the sentiment really is, yes, there's a lot changing, and yes, right, the kind of the very near term, we don't know exactly how the rising interest rates and how inflation will really play out, but that there is a belief that the industry itself is well positioned to find its strength again. Not this week. Find its strength and keep going. Even if there's a short-term pause, that's not a major impact in the long run. So in terms of trends, I think so first I'll just mention the housing. That's the one, too much for too many. So it's just, as unfortunately getting to be one of our constant themes. So I just want to point that out yet again, and we emphasize that really there is no one silver bullet that's understood, but there is work that can be done, which is allowing for more density in more places is one, reducing the cost of development in terms of regulatory fees is another. So and making the best of and still holding out hope that there's technology that can play a bigger role, and also I think getting back to the first two, kind of expediting approvals, because the NIMBYism really has been able to slow things down. I'd say another one is another over kind of the themes are kind of the trends are kind of very closely interwoven, and I'm going to use office as an example. So typically in a downturn, there is in the office sector there is a flight to less expensive office space. But in fact, what's happening now is the opposite. So
Right.
It's more a structural change that we're seeing in that, and there is a flight to quality, and this is this brings out what then happens to those other buildings. So this is a little bit starting to be like what we've talked about, what people have understood about retail, which is for a decade or so where we're over-retailed, and so what do you do with the sites or the buildings? And in retail cases, it's typically the site that is the most valuable, not the particular buildings, although there can be certainly reuse of many buildings. So this is something that is going in one direction, but opening up opportunities in another direction, and the flight to quality. And the flight to quality you also see in retail, where there are so many. It's the grocery anchored and the neighborhood and the power center. All these things that are providing people with what they need. So that is also connected to the other flip side of that is we saw a spike in the online shopping in the pandemic, and it's come down. You can't, you have to eat in restaurant. When you go out to eat, you go out to eat, right? So people are sick of staying in to eat. But also there is just a need to touch and feel what you might need at any particular time. So we see a little dip, but not back to pre-pandemic levels of the online shopping. That is also the other flip side of that is what's going to happen to industrial. But sticking with retail, we see that flight to quality too. So for those really good, well-located, well-tenanted opportunities, centers, those are doing really well. And I think the complaint is there aren't enough good locations for people that want to get into retail. But then there is all the other older, not well configured, not well located, not offering what people need. And that's really, so we really see the office sector starting to look the same way. So flight to quality, where it's good, and where it's not, it's going to be opportunities for other uses. There's not going to be a way. Not every building can be converted. Not every office building can be converted. Certainly, if it's in the suburbs and the zoning and it wasn't built to maximize the zoning, then there's inefficiency to use that building. Those will be tear downs. But there's a lot of, I think there's a whole kind of new niche industry that is that is developing the skills to do these conversions. That's another opportunity in itself, as well as the actual opportunity to bring new life to a building. So I've touched on many trends there, but they all kind of they do connect.
Yeah, I think that's, again, what's so great about the report is we could spend days talking about this. So we've got to, but I think that's maybe a good spot to kind of wrap up the preview here of the reports. Again, we'll have a few conversations to follow this one about the presentation at fall meeting here. And again, highly recommend everybody that's listening, go download the report if you haven't, so that you can follow along with these conversations. So Anita, why don't you let the listeners know again a little bit more how they can learn more about the report and generally the work that you're doing at ULI.
Sure. Always go to uli.org. The Emerging Trends report right now is on the front page, so that's quite easy to find. Otherwise, you can do a search in our find it very easily. It is one of our flagship reports. It's right there, front and center, and then also under. In the menu there, you should be able to find the Center for Real Estate Economics and Capital Markets for our other products.
Thank you, Anita. Next up, we'll hear from Andy Cohen, co-CEO at Gensler. Gensler is a global design and architecture firm founded in San Francisco in 1965. In 2021, Gensler generated over $1.25 billion in revenue, the most of any architecture firm in the U.S. In this interview, Andy shares highlights from the Emerging Trends in Real Estate panel at the fall meeting. We hope you enjoy the conversation with Andy Cohen. All right, Andy, we're coming fresh off of the Emerging Trends panel that you were on today. So again, appreciate you coming and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thanks so much for having me. Really exciting panel.
Absolutely. And again, that theme throughout here, it's been fantastic to be here at the fall meeting, and the engagement with the audience and just the excitement in the industry heading into an uncertain time, I think is very refreshing. So before we jump into the panel, why don't you tell us about your background in real estate and Gensler?
Well, I've been at Gensler for 42 years, so I've been a lifer at Gensler.
Yeah.
I've also been co-CEO of Gensler with my partner Diane Hoskins for 18 years. So it's been a great run. Our firm has grown from a small pop-up firm in San Francisco to now we're 7,000 people in 50 offices, and last year we worked in over 100 countries.
Wow.
All about, design and all about the optimism of design can do to change the world and make a difference in the world.
Yeah, and so that was Byron asked one of the first questions on the panel, what is your word for 2023, and yours was transformation.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what that means to you.
Yeah, I said transformation because I really believe that the world is in transformation. Look, the COVID was a wake-up call for climate change and the health of the planet. And as an industry, all of us, 40% of all CO2 is created by buildings, more than automobiles, more than industry. And so we have this great responsibility in transformative times, not only based on where the economics are going, but also with what's happening in the world and our responsibility towards sustainable design and net zero design. So these are transformative times. Every one of the industries we're involved with, from office to hotels to retail, every one of those businesses are changing, and we are at the forefront of the strategies and the design to make that difference in those industries.
And one of the things you talked about on the panel, and is obviously still a big question on everybody's mind, is the dynamic of the office environment, right? We've been exploring how does this change the nature of how we use the space? And that was a big focus of what you were talking about, and just the layouts and more of a kind of almost creating that work from home environment right in the office. So maybe tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of how we use that space.
I mean, what we've been saying is we need to make the office a destination, not an obligation, a place where people want to go, not that they have to go.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the office as an experience multiplier. All about collaboration, creating visceral experiences, social interaction. Collaboration from our research fell off 50% during COVID. 50%.
Yeah.
Imagine that. So the idea of bringing people back to the office as a way to collaborate, a way to innovate, to socialize is really important. Along with that, mentoring and coaching, which is so important, especially to the next generation leaders, the Gen Xers, the millennials are so important. And what that too fell off by almost 60%. So we really believe the future of the office is about bringing people together. It's about creating great experiences. We're seeing this sense of choice, like you mentioned, that when you were home, you worked at your dining room table, in your living room, and we're taking that idea of sense of choice and bringing that to the office. So when you come back to the office, based on what you're doing in that day, the tasks that you're doing, you can work in different types of environments. And what we're seeing is taking out the rows and rows of desks in this open plan environment, this very dense environment, and we're creating more living room settings, more cafes, more inside-outside spaces, more green spaces, with the ability for people to choose where they want to work for that day that's most conducive for interaction and innovation.
Yeah, and you mentioned this reversing that trend of densification. I think you said we're about 250 square foot per person 10, 12 years ago. Pre-COVID, we're under 100 square foot per person.
Right.
Obviously, that's reversing now. Do you have any thoughts, or what are you seeing now in current designs of where that's going on a square foot per person, or is that even a relative metric anymore?
Yeah, our client. Well, look, we work with most of the major tenants and clients and global accounts around the world, and they're all coming to us saying, what is the future of workplace?
Right.
And workplace has radically changed. Like you said, 10 years ago it was 250 square feet per person. Before COVID, it was down to 75 square feet per person. And these big open plans, ubiquitous open plans with rows and rows of desks.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing now is we need more we space instead of I space. Space, again, for around collaboration and pulling people together in a really conducive way. So the industry is radically changing. We're seeing this transformation of our clients' businesses. It's all really about their culture, which I didn't get a chance to talk about on stage. It's this idea that our clients are coming to us saying, how can we really reinstate our culture, our identity as an organization? And that comes through the design of their space, the brand of their space, and their people first. Creating, it's no longer about the company space, it's about people space and people first centric spaces.
And so when you look across the spectrum of either office owners or tenants or occupiers, it's a different level of, I guess, attainability to be able to create these gorgeous, welcoming, inviting, collaborative A+ spaces. For buildings or owners or tenants that maybe don't have the luxury of doing that, they don't have the budget to do so, or have the opportunity to work with a firm like Gensler, how can they incorporate some of these things in their practice so that it starts to create some of those environments?
Yeah, I mean, I think for every organization, there's little things you can do through branding and through design that'll increase that awareness of of their company. But I also think there's a tremendous flight to quality of the types of buildings that people are looking at, buildings that have tremendous amenities. So whether you're a small tenant or a large tenant, being in walkable districts, walkable cities where there's amenities that are close by or within the building that introduce technology into the buildings that make it more seamless environment. So I really think for any tenant right now, you have to make the workplace a destination.
Yeah.
Like I said, you have to make it worthwhile to go in, especially if people are commuting from long distances. What we're finding from our research right now is that we're seeing that probably by the time all the fallout happens in our return back to office, we're seeing that probably 10 to 20% of people will still be working from home. So hybrid is here to stay.
Yeah.
So all companies, big and small, need to look at how they're going to integrate a hybrid environment. And that means in the offices, you still have to have the ability to have screens in conference rooms, have smaller conference rooms for people to meet in, so that you can include the people that are working from home also. It's not going away.
Yeah. And now we're at a time in our industry where data is becoming much more central to a lot of these decisions, and smart buildings and sensors was one of the things that you mentioned. What do you see as the future of smart buildings? Is it again empowering just the ease of use of an office space? Are there insights that operators can learn about how the space is utilized, or managers of companies that are occupying the space, what insights can they learn from some of these smart building initiatives?
It's all about the user experience. You know, when we were locked up on these screens and Zoom calls, everyone's looking for visceral experience and that user experience, and technology can help facilitate that. You know, we're seeing in buildings the idea of using your cell phone as a concierge service, that you can order food from, that when you check in the building, it knows who you are, that it calls up your elevator to the right suite, that it knows which conference room you're going to. So the integration of technology, whether it's facial recognition that knows exactly who you are when you enter a building, to your point, to utilization of space. We're seeing sensor technology is helping us design the spaces of the future. It allows us to study circulation patterns. It allows us to study utilization patterns that allow us to design spaces that are more about the way people want them to be than prescribed designs.
And now one of the emerging trends is this concept of reutilization, right? Of not necessarily demolition of these existing facilities, but more of adaptive reuse that we've seen, again, at different periods throughout history come, in different waves. How do you see adaptive reuse going forward when we're, as was discussed today, we're in an environment where we're probably over-retailed, depending on how the nature of how we use the office space. I think still to be determined in terms of what the overall footprint requirements are going to be, if there's going to be a reduction in footprint required, but then at the same time you've got this competing factor of you need more square foot per person. So how do you see some of these adaptive reuse plays, especially when you're looking at the base property being either in the retail or office sector?
I think going into the next year or two, I think adaptive reuse is going to be everything. It's all about taking existing space and really making it, much better design. What we're seeing is lots of reconstituted spaces. Like, for example, we're doing a lot of buildings right now where we're taking antiquated office buildings and converting them to residential. We have a residential calculator, actually, that takes existing building footprints and quickly figures out whether residential will work in it. We're taking old malls and converting them to office space or retail space, mostly office space. So we're seeing adaptive reuse is the future, also from a sustainability standpoint, and from a cost standpoint. It's getting really expensive to build new buildings right now. The idea that you can take an existing building and renovate it for much less cost, but also from a sustainability standpoint, much less embodied carbon. And that today, from a sustainability, is really important. And that is the energy used to put the materials together that build a building. And so we're seeing that adaptive reuse is one of the answers. There's a lot of existing inventory. Obviously, there's a lot of B and C space that needs to be looked at differently from an adaptive reuse standpoint.
And then we've talked a little bit about the embodied carbon versus getting to net zero for operating carbon. You mentioned mass timber. We're seeing more construction there. Maybe tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in that space and how that plays into the sustainability going forward.
Well, we've been studying embodied carbon a lot, and embodied carbon is so important that, and really people haven't focused on it that much, and that is the energy it takes to make the materials and transport the materials. So, for example, the biggest uses of embodied carbon are steel and concrete. And we're working with a lot of companies and subcontractors right now on the innovations within those industries, because we've got to change the embodied carbon in those two materials, or other materials like carpeting as an example, or studs in walls. So we're seeing this, transformation in the business going on right now around embodied carbon, and how the future of sustainability will be about the materials that are used in a really smart way. And also, what's really important also is the idea that we can build buildings out of timber, reforested, recarbonization of wood, so that wood is an efficient material and it uses way less energy than steel. So we're seeing, literally, we're designing hundreds of buildings out of timber right now that also aesthetically create a much warmer and intimate feeling inside the buildings.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the conversations we had yesterday was around some of the zoning challenges of creating these communities, and almost going back to a pre-modern zoning concept where we had more vibrant communities, you had more inclusive communities. Now we're talking about going back to maybe pre-modern technology building construction methods, right? We're going back to what we've already known and kind of reverting to some of those tried and true methods, right? Are you seeing more of that?
Yeah, I mean, something that we've been researching over COVID is the idea of a 20-minute city, right? The idea that when during COVID, people wanted every one of their services and amenities within a walkable distance of their neighborhood or district or city. And that concept of a walkable city is so important.
Yeah, that's great. And so now when you think about some of the changes that you've seen in your practice leading into COVID and then now in a post-COVID environment, I'm always curious which of those were accelerants of trends that were already underway versus truly fundamentally different ways that we're going to use spaces. So I'm just curious, what have you seen in your practice that you believe will be a long-term, just fundamental shift in how you guys look at the space?
I think COVID has fundamentally changed the way we think about space and design, and that design needs to be an experience multiplier. And I think that the future, whether it's retail or office or hospitality, we have a sports practice. It's all about that experience. Whether in a hotel, it's the guest experience and focusing on the design for that, or in a sports facility, it's about the fan experience, or on and on. In office, it's a workplace experience. There's fundamental changes that are going on all around creating better experiences, better design, more user-focused design, more about creating interactive experiences. Like I said, collaboration and really social interaction. People are yearning for it, and that is going to stay forever. The idea of interaction, social interaction, people working together, collaborating together, mentoring and coaching together.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a great spot to wrap it up. So, Andy, appreciate you taking some time with us. Thank you, Andy. Last up and rounding out today's episode is Onay Payne, Managing Director at Lafayette Square. Lafayette Square was founded in 2020 with the mission of being the leading provider of impact-driven capital. In this conversation with Onay, she shares insights from her career and her thoughts as a panelist on the emerging trends in real estate presentation at the fall meeting. We hope you enjoy the conversation with Onay Payne. Well, Onay, thank you so much for joining us, coming fresh off of the Emerging Trends panel.
It's great to be here with you, Adam. Thank you for the invitation.
Fascinating conversation. Before we dig into what you all just talked about, why don't you tell us a little bit about the work that you do now at Lafayette Square?
Sure. Lafayette Square is a mission-driven investment platform. I joined Lafayette Square earlier this year to build out our real estate platform. We have a middle market credit team. We also have a renewables team, and everything that we do within the three verticals that exist today really focus on deploying financial capital and services in ways that support the more equitable outcomes for low and moderate income individuals. So really it's a place plus people strategy. Low and moderate income census tracts, low and moderate income individuals, and really more equitable outcomes and the socioeconomic mobility which is required in order to achieve that.
Yeah, and you definitely mentioned the socioeconomic mobility in your presentation today. You also, coming from Clarion Partners, mentioned you joined Lafayette to be part of the change, right? A little more entrepreneurial. That seems to be a pretty common theme as we're in a period of great change right now. So I'm just curious, can you tell us a little bit more about that transition, how that's been from super institutional with Clarion to now more entrepreneurial with Lafayette?
Yeah, listen, Adam, I had a great career at Clarion and still had runway there. There were things about that experience that were, we choose to be happy, we choose to find meaning in what we do every day. But I was increasingly called to be part of transformational change as opposed to more incremental change. And so at some point, and this all of us can probably relate to this, the cost of staying becomes greater than the cost of leaving. So while there is some risk to being part of an entrepreneurial firm, I think for me, being with the right team members, with the right perspective and diversity of perspective, because we have a bunch of folks from, for example, the social sector that ran CDFIs. We have folks that worked in government, as well as people from institutional, more traditional backgrounds like mine. I felt it was the right platform, right team to join to be part of, hopefully, transformational change. That's the goal, at least.
Good, and I think we're in a very it's an exciting time in our industry, right? I think, and to see what we've seen here at the fall meeting, there's so much engagement and change right now. It's awesome to see, and I think, again, great to be a part of that. So when we dig into the panel, I think one of the first questions that Byron asked, which I thought was great, is what is your word for 2023? And I think you said realignment. Tell us a little bit about what that means.
Sure. So as we move into this space of continued uncertainty, we need to refocus individually, as a society, as individual contributors, but really thinking about this from a societal perspective, refocus on what is most important and align our priorities, the time that we spend, the energy that we give to what is most important. And so for me, the transition to Lafayette Square from Clarion was part of that realignment. I'm continuing to see that, certainly with many of my counterparts, with where our firms deploy their capital, how they think about moving towards, within strategic initiatives, moving towards affecting realities that they want to affect. So really realigning time, realigning energy, and effort with what is most important to us. So thinking about the priorities and making sure that we're doing the things that we need to do to affect them.
Perfect. And now maybe talk us through your involvement with the report research, and what were some of your more interesting trends, or what are you paying most close attention to in the emerging trends this year?
Sure. So one, excited to be part of the research, and I wrote a little sidebar focused really on the emergence of impact investing. So that speaks to my experience today. But really, I would suggest, or it's clear to me that, again, what I'm doing today can be really consistent with what we saw in the report. So, for example, the decreased levels of affordability from a housing perspective. Even if we're going in, especially as we're going into a recession, potentially, Mary suggested that was the case, it's coming. That becomes an increasingly more important factor for us to think about as individuals, as a society. Thinking about affordability is one example. Andy on the panel spoke to the use of office space and what that means in terms of how we collaborate, how we pull people into spaces for collaboration, and that can be in the physical office. But really, I think what spoke to me about what he was saying is it can't be a push, right? Or at least it had not been a push for the past couple of years, where talent was so scarce because unemployment rates were so low. We're potentially going into a space where unemployment rates are potentially increasing, but I think the trend is the same. We have to figure out how to compel versus push. And so how do we create culture and utilize the built environment to do that, certainly within office construct, but really thinking about how we do utilize the built environment to achieve all the priorities that are that we have listed for ourselves.
You mentioned that Lafayette Square is a remote-first firm, and you made a comment about how can you use space to inspire inclusion. How do you do that, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so obviously we defer to Andy with respect to specifics of design, but I can share what it is about my experience and perspective that I would want to see incorporated. The reality for me was that it took a lot of effort to go into the office every day. I can be highly productive and am highly productive in the office, but I can also be highly productive at home. I can be highly productive in hotel rooms, as I have been for the past several weeks of conference season. But there's little appeal to going into an office building every day to sit in a cubicle, or in my case, an office. Being real, it's been a long time since I've had that cubicle time. But really, why do I have to go into the office to do work that I could potentially be doing much more efficiently at home, without having wasted the 30 minutes of doing my hair and makeup? Because y'all know you're going to talk about me if my hair and makeup isn't done. And if I put on the same suit every day the way men do, the reality is there's still a different standard for women. And number two, without having wasted another 60 minutes each way or more commuting into and from the office. So there needs to be a very deliberately collaborative purpose and agenda for journeying into the office. And honestly, for me, the desire to take that journey into the office really isn't motivated by whether it has spaces that feel like living rooms or whether I get free lunch, though those things are probably much more important to younger millennials and to Gen Zers. The draw really starts way before that with my sense of belonging within that firm. Do I feel respected and valued for the work that I do? Do my colleagues and partners embrace rather than ignore or simply tolerate the multiple dimensions of who I am as a black woman, or do I need to contort myself to adapt to a white male dominated space and leadership style that has done very little to adapt to me? Do I have a true career path and potential for growth and advancement within this firm? Those are the things that I thought about when I started my career 25 years ago. Those are the things I think about today for myself. And those are the things I think about for the junior talent on my team and in my firm that I endeavor to support. So for me, that space that I occupy while I work has little influence over my sense of engagement with the company. While that engagement can absolutely be enhanced by the built environment, the engagement comes before and beyond the built environment. The design of the office is important, but I think many perhaps employers may be focusing on the design of their spaces instead of focusing on the ways in which they truly support their people. And the last thing that I'd add on this point is that I don't think I'm alone, particularly being taking this from the perspective of a woman as I look at some of the recent surveys and data that have come out. So McKinsey and LeanIn.org just did their annual Women in the Workplace survey, and they noted that women leaders are leaving their companies at the highest rates we've ever seen, at much higher rates than men leaders. And so, and one of the many things that they are requesting are deliberately inclusionary environments. And so a focus that that employers make on DEI and also on autonomy, whether they choose to work 100% from the office, 100% from home, or in some hybrid style. So if we within the real estate industry really want to tap the potential of female employees and female leaders, this is something that we have to think about and be, again, really intentional about.
Yeah, and culture is something we've talked about a lot. Again, in the technology world, that's a very, it's a big buzzword, right? How you build a culture. Even more challenging in a remote environment. I'm curious, how are you building that in a remote first environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we are very intentional about building culture. It is in very simple ways. For example, we have a standing meeting, morning meeting 3 days a week, where we are highly transparent about what's going on within our everyday. But that's one way. We also do recognize that we do need to see each other. We want to see each other on a regular basis. So
that's
while we
important,
are
wanting to see each other.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so while we are remote first, we are intentional about creating spaces and time where we spend together. So whether it's our quarterly retreat or with it individual teams, connecting in person, those are part of the ways. But I would also say that there are a lot of ways that we check up on each other and build culture remotely. And I will say one of the things that is so interesting about our culture, and we were studied by a professor at Carnegie Mellon, Professor Brandy, and she said that a lot of firms build culture through homophily and propinquity. Those are SAT words.
Yeah,
homophily
you'll
and
need to dive in on those ones for
right?
me.
So homophily, the inclination to be to form connection with people who are like you. Propinquity, the inclination to build connection with people who are within close proximity of you.
Okay.
So even within a specific office building, that pod, the Northeast pod, tends to build culture, tends to build trust. Whereas within our firm, some of the things that we have done in terms of number one, being mission aligned, number two, having these structural processes and forms of collaboration and connection that support trust building are important. And so rather than seeing a really dense network of homophily and propinquity connections, what we have done within our remote first firm, which is we're probably in 20 different states for our team members, is that you see a really healthy dispersion of connection that suggests culture building, even though we're not in the same physical space 5 days a week.
And so is that actually an opportunity of being remote? Is where you can
I think
break
it's an
through some of those?
opportunity of being remote. I think for us, we've chosen to make it an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this on stage. Instead of spending money on office space, we have chosen to invest in talent and in technology in a way that fosters career development and fosters culture building. So we spend specific time on a weekly basis and one of these Monday morning meetings thinking about talent development and things that are talent development and culture building. That's an intentional part of the structure. I don't think it's that a foreign concept, right? When I was at Clarion, I managed a team that was based in Mexico. Half of my teammates were in other states or in other countries, and we had to figure out how to work together effectively. I had to figure out how to support them, my teammates, in their development, how to achieve common goals. And so while there's an absolute importance to being within proximity of one another on a regular basis, it's not that foreign a concept from, I think, a lot of the lived professional experience for many of us.
Yeah, there's been components of it before. I think just what we went through recently just put such a spotlight on it. It made us define it a little bit more, maybe pay more attention to some of the things that we were already doing before, but like I agree, more intentional now about how we go about some of those. So as we wrap up here, your advice for 2023, I think I got this right. You suggested how to integrate the focus on what you do every day to combine profit and purpose. Like that's again, when you're looking in the impact world, and we've talked about this on a couple of prior episodes, how you price that in, right? The impact has been a challenge, I think, for our industry so far because it is still a profit-driven enterprise. So I'd love for you to dig in a little bit on that, and how do you combine profit and purpose?
Yeah. So let me be clear. I'm a capitalist, but I'm a conscious capitalist, and I think there's a potential to create, as opposed to the zero-sum construct that we often live with, where some have to give up in order for others to get. I reject that notion. I think we can create a bigger pie if we create a deliberately inclusionary economy and deliberately inclusionary growth strategy that focuses, yes, on profit, but also on purpose. And the way in which we do those things or combine those things should not be contradictory. We need to figure out how profit or how purpose can complement what we want to do on a profit-based way. And so I think sometimes when they are those two concepts are in contradiction, it's because we haven't figured out how to have them be self-reinforcing. And so the way that we're thinking about it is, we'll have another conversation about our theory of change, but really it is very simply that doing the right thing de-risks our investment. And so we are able to deliver strong risk-adjusted returns by doing the right thing, doing well and doing good. They are in alignment and absolutely part of how we move forward for ourselves, for our broader stakeholders, which include our shareholders, but also our employees and our communities. We can combine the two to do good.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a wonderful point to end on. Onay, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. How can listeners learn more about what you're up to at Lafayette Square?
Well, certainly go to LafayetteSquare.com. Feel free to send me an inbox on LinkedIn. I will get back to you. We are excited about engaging with the broader community and really helping to co-create solutions to address the societal needs that we're facing today.
Perfect. We appreciate your time and have a great rest of the fall meeting. Thank you again to Anita, Andy, and Onay. It's always great to get insights into ULI's Emerging Trends Report, and remember, you can download the report by checking the show notes. Highly recommend it. This concludes our special series from ULI's Fall Meeting. Thank you again to ULI for allowing us to share these insights and highlights with all of you. If you're interested in attending an upcoming ULI meeting or event, we highly recommend it, as they're one of the best concentrations of influential real estate minds you're going to find in the business. You can learn more about future meetings by going to uli.org, and thank you for listening along with us. With that, we'll catch you on the next one.